Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. Knox Wilder's boots crunched on scattered leaves as he walked toward his garage. Each step was measured and deliberate. 20 years of Special Forces operations had honed his situational awareness to a razor's edge. The late October wind whistled through bare branches, carrying not just the musty scent of decay, but something else, something wrong. He paused at the corner of the house, letting his senses catalog the environment. The security light above the garage door should have activated by now. Its silence spoke volumes. His hand moved instinctively to where his sidearm would usually rest, finding only empty air. Retirement had made him complacent. That ended tonight. Knox scanned the driveway, noting fresh oil spots where none should be. 3 distinct patterns suggested multiple vehicles had been parked there recently. His mind calculated angles, distances, potential cover points. The garage's architectural layout offered 4 viable hiding spots for ambushers. If he was setting up the kill zone, that's where he'd place his men. The garage door's mechanical sound seemed unnaturally loud in the evening stillness. Knox kept his breathing steady, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. His fingers hovered over the light switch, muscles coiled tight. The darkness ahead felt wrong, heavy with anticipation, when a shoe scraped against concrete. Amateur mistake. Knox's mind mapped the sound's location. Second hiding spot behind his workbench. The whisper of fabric against fabric came next. Third position near the storage shelves. The third attacker was completely silent, making him the most dangerous. He flipped the switch. Nothing happened. Someone had disabled the internal lights. Smart. They'd planned this well, but not well enough. The dim illumination filtering through the dusty windows was all Knox needed. He'd trained for operations in far worse conditions. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, moonlight glinting off a tactical knife. The blade's trajectory telegraphed the attacker's training military background, probably Eastern European based on the grip style. Knox stepped inside the thrust, his body moving with practiced efficiency as he grabbed the attacker's wrist, applying precise pressure to the radial nerve while twisting sharply upward. Bone cracked with a satisfying snap. The knife clattered to the floor as the man held, the sound echoing off concrete walls. 1 down, the second attacker emerged from behind the workbench, moving faster than Knox expected. A former wrestler, based on his stance, he came in low, aiming to disable Knox's legs. A solid strategy, if Knox had been an average target. Instead of retreating, Knox drove his knee up, years of combat training condensed into one devastating strike. His kneecap connected with the attacker's chin. The impact traveled through his leg like a shockwave. Teeth cracked. The wrestler crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. 2 down, the third attacker finally revealed himself, emerging from behind the SUV with a suppressed pistol, professional-grade equipment. Glock 19 with a high-end suppressor. This was the experienced one. Knox's mind calculated trajectories, factoring in the weapon's effective range and the confines of the garage. He spun, using the first attacker's body as a shield. 2 muffled shots thudded into the human shield's chest. The impacts transferred through to Knox's hands, but he held firm. In one fluid motion, he snatched the fallen knife from the ground and sent it spinning through the air. The blade caught the moonlight as it rotated, a deadly silver arc that ended in the shooter's throat. A perfect throw. The man dropped his weapon, hands clutching uselessly at the steel protruding from his neck. His last breath escaped in a wet gurgle. 3 down, Knox surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. 3 professional hitters, well-equipped and coordinated. The knife fighter and wrestler were neutralized but salvageable. The shooter was beyond help. Based on their equipment and techniques, this was a contracted hit, not a random attack. He approached the dying shooter, his mind already cataloging details. European military surplus combat boots, fresh calluses on the trigger finger. The man was an active operator, not some hired thug. This had been a professional job. A phone slipped from the man's pocket as Knox searched him. Latest model encrypted, another sign of a well-funded operation. The screen lit up with an incoming message that stopped Knox's breath in his throat. Make sure he suffers. I wanted to know it was me before he dies. The sender's name blazed in his mind like a brand. Sloan Mercer. Knox stared at the message, the words burning themselves into his memory. Each letter was an ice pick to his chest, piercing the armor he built around his heart. 15 years of marriage, countless moments shared, secrets confided, trust given freely, all of it a carefully constructed lie. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached, but his hands remained steady as they moved across the phone screen. Years of operational experience had taught him to compartmentalize, to push emotion aside, and focus on the tactical situation. He composed a reply. He begged for mercy, mentioned her name. The message sent with a quiet chime that echoed in the bloody silence of the garage. Knox moved with practiced efficiency, securing the scene. He dragged the shooter's body into the corner, positioning it to minimize blood spread. The knife fighter and wrestler were still breathing. Good. Live sources were always more valuable than dead ones. He found zip ties in his toolbox and bound the survivors professionally, tight enough to hold, loose enough to maintain circulation. They might be useful later, depending on how events unfolded. For now, they weren't going anywhere. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Now came the harder part, understanding why his wife of 15 years had ordered his death. Knox slipped out of the garage like a shadow, years of covert operations experience guiding his movements. The house loomed before him, warm light spilling from the living room windows. It looked exactly as it had every night for the past 15 years. Amazing how normal everything could appear when your whole world was shattering. He circled the perimeter, checking sight lines and potential escape routes. Professional habits died hard. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see Sloan pacing. Her blonde hair caught the lamplight as she moved, the same hair he'd run his fingers through countless times. She clutched her phone in one hand, her knuckles white with tension. She wasn't alone. A tall man with sharp Slavic features stood watching her, his posture rigid with military bearing. Knox's blood ran cold as recognition hit. Nikolai Orlov, Russian intelligence operative known for his work in deep cover operations. They'd crossed paths during Knox's final mission before retirement, a cluster in Belgrade that had left 3 good men dead. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Sloan's constant questions about his past missions, her sudden interest in his old contacts, the mysterious business trips that had started 3 years ago. All moments of their marriage had been a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. It's done. Sloan's voice carried faintly through the window. She held up her phone, displaying Knox's response. They just confirmed it. Nikolai's face remained impassive, but Knox caught the slight relaxation in his shoulders. Are you certain? They said, he begged. A smile curved Sloan's lips, an expression Knox had seen countless times before. How many of those smiles have been genuine? Mention my name at the end. Perfect. Knox's fingers dug into the wooden windowsill as he watched his wife begin to pace again. Her movements took on a theatrical quality, like an actor rehearsing for a crucial performance. I can't believe it. She practiced, her voice trembling with carefully modulated grief. He was fine when he left for work this morning. They're saying it was a carjacking gone wrong. No, there must be some mistake. Nikolai moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Your performance is perfect, my love. Soon we'll be free of him. And everything we've worked for these past 3 years will be ours. 3 years. The revelation hit Knox like a physical blow. He thought back to when the changes had started. Small things at first. New friends he never met. Late nights at the office. Increased interest in his work. He attributed it to the natural evolution of a long marriage. Fool. I've waited so long for this, Sloan murmured, leaning back against Nikolai. playing the devoted wife to that self-righteous man, always so convinced of his moral superiority, so certain he was one of the good guys. He never suspected a thing. Knox watched them embrace, his face carved from stone. In his mind, he was already cataloging resources, mapping out strategies. Every kiss, every intimate moment, every shared secret had been weaponized against him. Their betrayal was absolute, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed he would die quickly, cleanly. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "This better be important, Wilder." "Ronan," Knox said quietly. "I need your help. How fast can you meet me?" Detective Ronan Clay's silence spoke volumes. They'd worked together on multiple operations, saved each other's lives more times than either could count. When Knox spoke in that tone, it meant something big was brewing. The usual place. 1 hour. Knox ended the call and took one last look through the window. Sloane and Nicolay remained wrapped in their embrace, celebrating their presumed victory. He could burst in and confront them quickly and violently, but that would be too easy to clean. They'd orchestrated years of betrayal, planned his murder with cold precision. They deserved something more elaborate, but he melted away into the shadows, leaving them to their celebration. Let them think they'd won. Let them grow comfortable in their victory. He had work to do. The Hungry Dog was a dive bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and conversations weren't remembered. Knox arrived 20 minutes early, muscle memory from countless operations taking over. He chose a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances and potential threat vectors. The bartender, a grizzled veteran with a 1,000-yard stare, brought him a beer without being asked. They exchanged the subtle nod of men who recognize their own kind. In places like this, you learn to spot the differences between those who played dangerous and those who truly were. Knox's mind worked as he waited, processing the events of the night with mechanical precision. The attack had been well planned but flawed in execution. They'd known his capabilities but underestimated his instincts. Amateur mistake. He wondered if it had been Sloane's influence or Nicolay's arrogance. Ronan Clay walked in exactly on time. His detective's badge concealed beneath a weathered leather jacket. He ordered a whiskey at the bar, his eyes sweeping the room with professional paranoia. "Nothing has changed since our last operation together. Same cautious movements, same tactical awareness." "You look pretty good for a dead man," Ronan said as he sat down, placing his drink carefully on the square table. Knox raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast. Free bodies in your garage tend to make waves." Ronan took a measured sip of his whiskey. "Want to tell me why I shouldn't be arresting you right now?" Knox placed a shooter's phone on the table, sliding it toward his old friend. "Take a look." Ronan scrolled through the messages, his expression darkening with each swipe. "Jesus Christ, Knox." "Sloane, with help." Knox's voice was ice. "Remembered Nikolai Orlov, the Russian man from the Belgrade operation." Ronan set his glass down hard enough to slosh whiskey onto the table. "That man is involved in this. They've been working together for 3 years. Knox's words were precise, measured. "Using my marriage to gather intelligence, probably selling it to the highest bidder. I need to know what resources they have. Ronan, offshore accounts, safe houses, contacts. Everything." Ronan studied his friend's face, reading the cold fury behind a controlled exterior. "You're going after them. They tried to have me killed in my own home." Knox's eyes were hard. "What do you think?" The detective was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he pulled out his own phone and began typing. "You remember what happened in Belgrade? When we thought we had Orlov cornered, he sacrificed 6 of his own men to escape." Knox's expression didn't change. Had the building rigged to explode the whole time? And now he's got his hooks and Sloane. Ronan shook his head. "How much does she know about your operations?" "Everything." The word hung in the air between them. 15 years of pillow talk, mission details, contact names, operational procedures. She was thorough. Christ. Ronan took another drink. This goes deeper than just you, Knox. If they've been selling that intel, I know. Knox's voice was steady. That's why they need to be stopped permanently. I'll send you everything I can dig up. But Ronan looked up, his expression grave. This has to be clean. I can't protect you if things get messy. What have you ever known me to be messy? Ronan snorted. Belgrade. That was different. Knox's lip twitched in what might have been a smile. This is personal. That's what worries me. Ronan finished his whiskey and stood. I'll be in touch when I have something solid. Watch your back. If they figure out you survived, they won't. Knox's voice was certain. Not until I want them to. After Ronan left, Knox remained at the table, his untouched beer growing warm. His mind worked through scenarios, discarding some, refining others. He thought about Sloane's smile as she practiced her widow's performance, about Nikolai's hands on her shoulders. The rage inside him was a cold, calculating thing. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from Ronan. A preliminary report on Sloane and Nikolai's activities, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, property purchases through shell companies, regular contact with known arms dealers and information brokers. They'd built quite an operation while he played the role of a dutiful husband. Knox allowed himself a small, dangerous smile. They'd used his marriage as a weapon against him. Now he would use their own carefully constructed world to destroy them. Piece by piece, he would dismantle everything they'd built. And when he was done, they would understand exactly who they tried to kill. He stood, leaving cash on the table for the untouched beer. The bar's other patrons instinctively avoided meeting his eyes as he walked out. There was something in his bearing that spoke of violence carefully leashed, of vengeance delayed but not denied. The night air was sharp with coming winter as Knox walked to his car. He had work to do. First, he needed to establish a new base of operations. The house was compromised. They'd be watching it. Then he'd start following the money trails Ronan had uncovered. Every transaction would lead to another connection, another pressure point he could exploit. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Sloane to her hired helpers, demanding confirmation. Knox imagined her growing anxiety as the silence stretched on. The first seeds of doubt taking root. Good. Let her worry. Let her wonder why her perfect plan hadn't yielded the expected results. He would take everything from them, just as they tried to take everything from him. Unlike their quick, efficient plan, his revenge would be slow, methodical, and absolute. They would watch their carefully constructed world crumble around them. Powerless to stop it, Knox started his car, his mind already mapping out the next steps. Some men would seek comfort in the bottom of a bottle after such a betrayal. Some would rage and confront their betrayers immediately. But Knox had spent his career turning pain into purpose, channeling emotion into action. This would be no different. As he drove into the gathering darkness, Knox allowed himself to feel the full weight of Sloane's betrayal for just a moment. 15 years of marriage, countless shared moments and memories, all of them tainted now. The pain was like a physical thing, threatening to crush his chest. Then he packed it away, sealing it behind walls of cold determination. There would be time for grief later. Right now, he had a war to plan. And unlike the quick death they'd planned for him, this war would be fought on his terms, at his pace, until nothing remained of their betrayal but ashes. The first order of business was securing resources. Knox pulled into the parking lot of a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that accepted cash and didn't ask questions. He prepared for situations like this, emergency funds and equipment stashed in various locations around the city. Old habits from his operational days that Sloane had probably mistaken for paranoia. Inside the Spartan room, Knox powered up a secured laptop, another preparation Sloane had known about. He began accessing dormant accounts and forgotten aliases, pieces of his past life he'd kept hidden even from her. The irony wasn't lost on him. Her betrayal had been built on secrets, And now his revenge would be built on secrets of his own. His phone buzzed with another message from Ronan. Detailed financial records showing regular payments from offshore accounts to various contractors. The operation was bigger than he'd initially suspected. Sloan and Nikolai hadn't just been gathering intelligence. They'd been building a network that Knox's fingers moved across the keyboard, following money trails and connecting dots. Each transaction told a story: weapon purchases, bribes to officials, payments to informants. They'd been thorough, professional, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed their target would be eliminated before anyone could unravel their web. Now that web would become their prison. He opened a secure messaging channel to some old contacts, people who owed him favors, debts that had never been called in. Until now, within hours, their carefully hidden accounts would begin experiencing technical difficulties. Their safe houses would become compromised. Their trusted allies would receive evidence of betrayal. Knox allowed himself a grim smile as he worked. They thought they'd stripped everything from him, but they'd forgotten the most important lesson from his military days. A wounded predator is the most dangerous kind. His phone buzzed one final time that night. Another message from Sloan to her hired helpers, tinged with desperation. "Why aren't you responding? Is it done?" Knox switched off the phone, letting her questions echo unanswered in the digital void. Let her uncertainty grow. Let her begin to wonder if her perfect plan had somehow gone wrong. The seeds of doubt would take root in her mind, growing stronger with each passing hour of silence tomorrow. She would wake up believing herself a widow free to begin her new life with Nikolai. She wouldn't realize that her old life was far from finished with her, that every step she and Nikolai took toward their imagined future would actually be leading them deeper into Knox's trap. They tried to write the ending to his story. Now he would write theirs, one devastating chapter at a time. Dawn broke over the city as Knox set up surveillance equipment in an abandoned office building across from Sloane's favorite cafe. Through his high-powered lens, he watched her perform her morning routine, a routine he'd shared for 15 years. She wore black, playing the part of the grieving widow perfectly. "Your wife's quite the actress." Ronan's voice crackled through Knox's earpiece. "She's not my wife anymore." Knox replied coldly, adjusting the focus. "What did you find?" "You're not going to like it." "Found some interesting transfers. Your accounts have been getting quietly drained for the past 3 years. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger alerts." Knox's jaw tightened. "How much?" "Nearly 2 million. She's been moving it through a series of shell companies. Final destination appears to be a Cayman Islands account controlled by our Russian friend." "Send me the details." "Already did." "There's more." Ronan paused. "Remember those classified files from the Belgrade operation? The ones that went missing last year? Let me guess. They've surfaced bits and pieces showing up in all the wrong places." "Knox." Ronan's voice dropped lower. "They're selling everything. Mission details, operative names, safe house locations. It's not just about you anymore." Through his lens, Knox watched Nikolai arrive at the cafe. The Russian moved with calculated precision, scanning the area before taking his seat. Amateur. His tradecraft is slipping. "Keep monitoring the transfers," Knox said. "I want to know every account they've touched." "What are you planning?" "Watch and learn." Knox adjusted his directional microphone, picking up the conversation at Sloane's table. Her performance was flawless. Eyes red-rimmed, hands trembling slightly as she sipped her coffee. "The police have no leads," she was saying, her voice carefully modulated to show restrained grief. "They're calling it a random carjacking gone wrong." Nikolai reached across the table, taking her hand. "You're doing perfectly, my love. A few more days of mourning. Then we can start moving the remaining assets. I just want this to be over." Sloane's free hand toyed with her wedding ring. To be free of him completely. Soon, Nikolai's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The buyers are already lined up for the rest of the intelligence. Once those transactions clear, we can disappear. Start fresh." Knox's finger tightened imperceptibly on his camera shutter button. Every word, every gesture was being recorded, evidence accumulating like snowflakes before an avalanche. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unlisted number. Package delivered. Account accessed terminated as requested. Right on schedule. Through his lens, Knox watched Nikolai check his phone. The Russian's expression remained controlled, but Knox caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The first domino has fallen. Is something wrong? Sloan asked, noticing Nikolai's tension. A minor setback. One of our accounts appears to be frozen. What? Sloan's careful grief slipped for a moment. How is that possible? Technical difficulties, apparently. Nikolai's voice was tight. I'm sure it will be resolved quickly. Knox allowed himself a small smile. The account wouldn't be resolved. He made sure of that. The funds had already been rerouted to a series of children's charities, an ironic destination for blood money. Time to move to phase 2, he murmured. Ronan's voice was cautious. Are you sure about this? Once you start down this road, they choose the game. Knox replied, already packing up his equipment. I'm just changing the rules. He'd spent the past week laying groundwork, planting evidence, corrupting files, spreading carefully crafted rumors through the criminal underground. Now it was time to watch those seeds bloom in beautiful chaos. The private banking office in Geneva was exactly as Knox remembered it. Polished marble and discreet wealth. He adjusted his expensive suit, playing the role of a concerned financial advisor perfectly. Monsieur Laurent, the bank manager, greeted him warmly. It's been too long. Time waits for no man, Henry. Knox smiled, using one of his oldest aliases. I trust you receive my documentation. Everything appears to be in order. The manager gestured to a stack of papers. Though I must admit, these transaction patterns are concerning. Show me. They spent the next hour reviewing account histories that Knox had carefully fabricated. Each document told a story of money laundering and intelligence selling, all leading back to Sloan and Nikolai's operation. You understand? Knox said finally, given the nature of these transactions, we have no choice but to freeze all related accounts pending investigation. Of course, the manager was already reaching for his phone. I'll alert our compliance department immediately. Knox left the bank, knowing that within hours, Sloan and Nikolai would lose access to nearly 40% of their funds. But money was just the beginning. His phone rang as he reached his rental car. Speak. It's done, Ronan reported. Evidence has been planted at all the designated locations. Whenever you're ready to trigger the investigation, Knox continued. What about their contacts? Already spreading the word. Those doctor communications you created are causing quite a stir. Half their network thinks they've been compromised. Knox's voice was steady. These people are paranoid on a good day. Now they're seeing shadows everywhere. Good. Knox checked his rearview mirror out of habit. How's our grieving widow handling the pressure? Getting sloppy. She tried accessing one of your old mission accounts this morning. Left digital fingerprints all over it. Make sure those traces lead somewhere interesting. Already done. By this time tomorrow, several intelligence agencies will be very interested in her activities. Knox ended the call, his mind already moving to the next phase. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to increase the pressure. Knox pulled into an underground parking garage, choosing a spot with good sight lines to all entrances. Right on schedule, a sleek black Mercedes pulled in 2 minutes later. Nikolai emerged, looking significantly less composed than he had at the cafe. Amazing what a week of cascading financial disasters can do to a man's polish. You're late, Knox called out, staying in the shadows. Nikolai spun, hand moving toward his concealed weapon. Who's there? Someone who knows what you've been selling. Knox kept his voice electronically distorted. Someone who's not very happy about it. I don't know what you're talking about. No, Knox transmitted a file to Nikolai's phone. Maybe these account numbers will refresh your memory. Or should we discuss the Belgrade files instead? Nicolay's face went pale as he checked his phone. How did you? Doesn't matter. What matters is what happens next. Knox let the threat hang in the air. You have a choice to make, your partner or your life. My partner, Sloan Mercer. We know she's been helping you access classified intelligence. Give her up. Provide proof of her involvement. And maybe you walk away from this. Nicolay's expression hardened. And if I refuse, then every intelligence agency from here to Moscow learns about your side deals. I wonder how your handlers will react to learning you've been selling their secrets to. You're bluffing. Check your accounts lately. Knox allowed himself a small smile in the darkness. That was just the beginning. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely. He left Nikolay standing in the garage, knowing the seeds of doubt had been planted. The Russian was a survivor above all else. Given enough pressure, he would turn on Sloan to save himself. The next phase of his plan required precise timing. He needed Sloan desperate, but not broken, paranoid, but not yet running. Most importantly, he needed her to make mistakes. His phone buzzed with a message from one of his planted sources. Target attempting to access emergency funds. Authorization denied. Perfect. The walls were closing in exactly as planned. Knox watched through his surveillance feed as Sloan paced her home office, phone pressed to her ear. Her carefully maintained widow's composure was cracking. What do you mean you can't access it? She demanded. That account was clean, completely untraceable. Even through the encrypted connection, Knox could hear Nicolay's agitation. Nothing is untraceable anymore. Someone is targeting us specifically. All our safety nets are compromised. That's impossible. Nobody knew about those accounts except... She stopped suddenly. Except who? Nobody. Sloane's voice hardened. Where are you? We need to meet. That's not a good idea right now. I'm being watched. By who? I don't know. Nicolay's voice dropped lower. But whoever it is, they know everything about Belgrade, about the intelligence sales, about Knox. Don't say his name. Sloane's composure shattered completely. He's dead. We made sure of it. Did we? The doubt in Nicolay's voice was exactly what Knox had been cultivating. The body was never found. The helpers never confirmed because they were dead. The police found them in our garage. Remember, this has to be something else. Someone must have tracked the financial transfers. Perhaps. Nikolay didn't sound convinced. I need to go work for a while. Sort some things out. What? No. You can't leave me alone right now. 24 hours. I'll contact you when it's safe. The line went dead. Knox watched Sloan stare at her phone in disbelief. Then, with trembling hands, she began pulling files from her desk drawer, hard copies of their operation that she'd thought were secure. Knox pressed his radio. She's moving the physical files right where we want her. Police are standing by. Ronan confirmed. Anonymous tip about suspicious activity is already logged. As soon as she leaves the house with those documents. No, Knox's voice was firm. Not yet. I want her cornered, not caged. Keep the surveillance tight. But don't move in. He watched Sloan stuff the files in her briefcase, her movements growing more frantic. Every few minutes she would glance over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. The confident conspirator of a week ago was gone, replaced by a woman who saw threats in every corner. His phone vibrated with an incoming message, a photo from one of his contacts showing Nikolay meeting with a known intelligence broker. Right on schedule. Our Russian friend is making his move. How long until the evidence we planted reaches his handlers? Already in motion. Ronan replied. FSB should be getting very interesting reports about their operatives' extracurricular activities right about now. Knox allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Nikolay would soon find himself trapped between multiple intelligence agencies, each believing he had betrayed them. The pressure would force him to act rashly. Desperate men made mistakes. Through his surveillance feed, Knox watched Sloan finally leave her office, briefcase clutched tightly to her chest. She looked like a hunted animal, which in many ways she was. Follow her, He ordered his surveillance team. I want to know every move she makes. She's headed for the private airport. Came to report minutes later. Looks like she's planning to run. Knox checked his watch. Right on time. Is everything in place? Airplane's been subtly sabotaged as requested. Nothing immediately obvious, but it'll never clear the runway. Perfect. Knox was already moving, anticipating the final confrontation to come. Maintain surveillance, but do not intervene. Whatever happens next, I want them to feel completely alone. He'd spent years in special forces learning to orchestrate chaos, creating situations where enemies destroy themselves. Now he was applying those lessons to dismantle the lives of those who had betrayed him. Sloan and Nikolai had tried to write his ending. Instead, they'd merely set the stage for their own destruction. Soon, they would understand the full cost of their betrayal. The game was approaching its final moves, and Knox intended to be there when the pieces fell. The private airstrip lay quiet under the midnight sky, its single runway stretching into darkness. Knox watched through his thermal scope as Sloan's car approached the security gate. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Target 1 approaching from the south. He murmured into his radio. Status on Target 2. Nikolai's vehicle spotted on the access road. Ronan reported. 3 minutes out. You sure about this? Knox never been more sure of anything. Knox adjusted his position on the maintenance building's roof, checking sightlines and escape routes. He'd spent days preparing this location, transforming it into the perfect trap. Now all the pieces were falling into place. Sloan pulled up to the private hangar where their escape plane waited. Even from this distance, Knox could see the tension in her movements as she emerged from the car. The briefcase containing their operations documents was clutched tightly to her chest. His earpiece crackled. Sir, we've got movement at the perimeter. 3 armed individuals approaching from the east. Right on schedule, Knox replied. Hold your positions. Let them through. He'd known Nikolai would bring backup. The Russian was too experienced to walk into an uncertain situation alone. Nikolai's black Mercedes pulled into the hangar, its headlights briefly illuminating Sloan's face. The fear there was evident. You're late. She snapped as Nikolai emerged from the car. We had to be careful, he replied, scanning the hangar with professional paranoia. The FSB is asking questions. Very specific questions. What kind of questions? The kind that get people killed. Nikolai's voice was tight. Someone sent them proof that we've been selling their intelligence. Photos, account numbers, meeting dates. That's impossible. Those records were secure. Nothing is secure anymore. Nikolai moved closer, lowering his voice. Everything we've built is compromised. Someone is 3 steps ahead of us, dismantling our operation piece by piece. Then we need to leave now. Sloan held up the briefcase. I have everything we need to start over. New identities, account numbers. About that. Nikolai's tone changed subtly. There's been a change of plans. Knox watched through his scope as Nikolai's backup emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. The fear on Sloan's face transformed into a shocked understanding. What is this? She whispered. Survival. Nikolai held out his hand. Give me the briefcase, Sloan. Maybe we can still salvage something from this mess. After everything we've built, everything we've been through. Built? Nikolai laughed harshly. You were a tool. Nothing more. A way to access Knox's intelligence. Now you're a liability. Knox allowed himself a small smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd orchestrated. Now for the next phase. Sir, his radio crackled. We've got multiple vehicles approaching. Looks like law enforcement. Hold positions. Below, the confrontation was escalating. Sloan had backed away from Nikolai, still clutching the briefcase. You're going to hurt me, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, just like we hurt Knox. No, my dear. Nikolai's smile was cold. Your departure will be much quicker than what we planned for him. A mercy. Sloan's laugh held an edge of hysteria. Do you want to know something funny, Nikolay? Something I never told you about that night. This isn't the time for. We never found his body. But Knox, he just vanished. Almost like someone had orchestrated this entire situation. Knox's voice boomed through the hangar speaker system, making everyone freeze. Amazing what people reveal when they think they're about to leave. Nikolay spun around, weapon raised. Knox, did you really think I'd leave so easily? Knox kept his voice electronically distorted, letting it echo from multiple speakers. That I wouldn't have contingency plans. You're getting sloppy, Nikolay. Age catching up with you. Show yourself. Why? So your men could try to stop me? Speaking of which, Knox pressed a button on his remote. You might want to ask them about the interesting conversations they've been having with their real employers. Nikolay turned to his backup team, just in time to see them train their weapons on him. What is this? He demanded. Insurance. One of them replied in heavily accented English. Moscow sends their regards. You see, Knox's voice continued. Loyalty is such a fragile thing, especially when people learn they've been betrayed. Your own men were quite interested to learn how you've been selling their intelligence, keeping the profits for yourself. Sloan used the distraction to back toward the plane, still clutching the briefcase. This is impossible. You're gone. We stopped you. You tried. Knox. She breathed his name like a curse. How long have you known? Long enough to dismantle everything you've built. Every account, every safe house, every contact. It's all gone. Sir, his radio crackled urgently. Law enforcement is 2 minutes out. Right on schedule. Knox kept his eyes on the scene below. You have a choice to make, both of you. The plane is fueled and waiting. The runway is clear. Of course, I wouldn't trust the maintenance work. Who knows what might have been tampered with? Nikolay's face hardened with decision in one smooth motion. He shot both of his former men, then turned the weapon on Sloan. The briefcase, he demanded. Now, Nikolay, please, there's no time. The police are coming, and I won't go to prison. He grabbed the briefcase from her grip. Nothing personal, my dear. Just survival. Knox watched as Nikolay ran for the plane, leaving Sloan standing alone in the hangar. Everything was proceeding exactly as he predicted. The Russian's survival instincts had overridden any loyalty. He might have felt the plane's engines roar to life as police sirens grew closer. Knox maintained his position, counting down in his head. 5, 4, 3. The plane began its takeoff roll, gathering speed down the runway. In the hangar, Sloan had fallen to her knees, watching her escape route disappear into the night. Point 2. 1. That plane was halfway down the runway when the first engine failed, followed quickly by the second. Knox's sabotage had been subtle but thorough. The aircraft veered sharply, its momentum carrying it off the runway and into the surrounding field. The explosion lit up the night sky, a fitting funeral pyre for a traitor. Police vehicles flooded the airstrip as Knox descended from his position. Sloan hadn't moved from her spot in the hangar, her eyes fixed on the burning wreckage in the distance. It's over, Knox said, approaching her. Everything you built, everything you betrayed me for, it's all gone. She looked up at him, tears cutting tracks through her perfect makeup. Are you going to hurt me too? No, Knox's voice was cold. Leaving would be too easy. You're going to live with what you've done every day in a cell, remembering how your perfect plan fell apart. I loved you once, she whispered. In the beginning, before Nikolay, before all of this. Does that mean anything to you? Knox looked at her for a long moment, remembering 15 years of shared life. All of it tainted now, poisoned by betrayal. No, he said finally. It means nothing. Detective Ronan Clay approached, flanked by heavily armed officers. Sloan Mercer, he announced formally. You're under arrest for conspiracy, espionage, and attempted harm. Knox watched as they led her away, her perfectly maintained facade finally crumbling completely. She looked back once, but he had already turned away. In his world, betrayal was unforgivable. She had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. We found a briefcase in the wreckage, Ronan reported after she was gone. Everything she kept about their operation. Between that and the evidence you gathered, she'll never see daylight again. And Nikolai, no way you survived that crash. Dental records will confirm. Ronan shrugged. It's over, Knox. You got them. Knox stared at the burning wreckage in the distance. Make sure the intelligence agencies get everything. The names they sold, the operations they compromised. I want their entire network exposed, already in motion. Ronan studied his friend's face. What will you do now? Disappear. Knox turned away from the fire. Knox Wilder died in that garage attack. Remember, time to make that official. You could stay. Help us clean up what's left of their operation. No, Knox's voice was firm. That life is over. They saw to that when they turned my marriage into a weapon. He walked away from the scene, leaving behind the burning evidence of his revenge. In the distance, police lights painted the night in red and blue, but he stuck to the shadows. Old habits died hard. His phone buzzed one last time. A message from one of his contacts confirming that all his new identity documents were in place. Knox Wilder was officially dead, and a new life awaited. Some men would seek closure, try to understand why their wife had betrayed them so completely. Some would celebrate their revenge, take satisfaction in the destruction of their enemies. But Knox had spent his career learning that some questions had no satisfying answers, and some wounds never truly healed. The night air carried the scent of smoke and aviation fuel as he walked to his waiting car. Behind him, emergency vehicles surrounded the crash site, their lights reflecting off the hangar's metal walls. The scene looked almost beautiful from a distance, a deadly light show. Knox didn't look back again. He had learned long ago that the past was best left buried along with the bodies and betrayals it contained. Tonight had been about justice, not closure, about consequences, not healing. He started his car, already thinking about his next destination. The world was large and Knox Wilder was dead. Time to see what his new life had to offer, but he would never forget, and he would never forgive. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.